Why did Roy leave Keeley? What are the similarities between Zava and Zlatan Ibrahimovic? What's changed with Ted this season? We'll be covering these questions and more in this video. Welcome to Square Eyes, a channel where we recap, review and take a sideways look at your favourite TV shows. In this video we'll be looking at episode 2 of season 3 of Ted Lasso. It's called I Don't Want to Go to Chelsea. I'll start by recapping everything that happened in the episode, then I'll give you a few of my thoughts, pick out my favourite line, talk about some interesting trivia from the episode, and then look ahead to what might be coming up in the next one. Let's jump straight in. The episode opens at Keeley's new PR agency, with Barbara lecturing Keeley about keeping costs down at the shoot for an advert for one of their clients, without any thought for the quality of what they're making. It's even more obvious now that the people working in Keeley's company weren't chosen by her and really don't suit her personality. They're drab, grey office drones, though maybe we'll see them loosen up as the season progresses. After the credits, we're in Rebecca's office and Trent Crimm is asking if he can follow the club for the season so he can write a book about what he observes. Ted has the final say about whether Trent can go ahead with his project, but the others make it clear that they don't want him to do it, but Ted agrees to it anyway. Then Higgins gets an alert to say Zava is leaving Juventus and wants to join a Premier League team. Rebecca isn't interested in signing him initially because he's got a reputation of being a bit of a diva, but then she hears that Rupert wants to sign him for West Ham and suddenly she changes her mind. Then Isaac tells Jamie that Roy and Keeley must have broken up because he's picked it up from studying their body language, which would be more impressive if Roy wasn't also handing Keeley a bag of her stuff at the exact same point he was telling him this. Jamie perks up at this information and walks down the hall. It looks like he's going to try and seduce Keeley, but instead he goes to provide emotional support to Roy. Once again we see that Jamie's turning into a pretty great guy. However, Jamie's offer of emotional support to Roy goes about as well as you'd expect. When Jamie tries to hug Roy, it confuses him and he thinks it's an attack. He's not ready for affection from Jamie, though through their conversation we find out that it was Roy who called it off with Keeley, which baffles Jamie, just like it baffled me. Tension in the scene is broken when Jamie threatens Will the Kitman, who's been in the room all along. We then see Ted reading one of Beard's books, Inverting the Pyramid, which is all about football strategy. Then he asks Beard about whether signing Zava would be a good idea. Beard confirms it would be a very good idea. He then shows Ted a video of the veggie dog vigilante, who headbutted a robber in the supermarket, and tells Ted that Zava was the man headbutting the robber in the video. Then we hear there are some rumours causing a commotion in the dressing room, and Ted and Beard go to investigate. Ted makes it worse by mentioning that the club hope to sign Zava, and that Trent Crimm is coming to cover the club. These weren't the rumours that had upset the players though, it was that Roy and Keeley had split up. Beard yelps at the news, and Ted faints for a moment. Then Higgins brings Trent Crimm down to the dressing room, and tells everyone to welcome him to the club with open arms and minds. Roy has a different welcome message. He tells the players not to say a word to Trent, or they'll have his forehead through their skull. On her advert shoot, Keeley bumps into one of her old friends, who's from the world of models who date footballers. From their conversation, it's obvious that Keeley is an exception for breaking out of that world and creating a career for herself. Higgins attempts to sign Zava stumble at the first hurdle, with his agent replying that it will be a waste of time and an embarrassment. He plans to sign for Chelsea instead, but Rebecca worries that Rupert will hijack the deal and take him to West Ham. Trent Crimm finds his job of being an embedded reporter at the club almost impossible after Roy has instructed the players not to talk to him. They descend into silence whenever he enters a room. Roy just growls rather than talks to him, despite the fact they're sharing an office. Keeley has offered her friend Shandy a job, but hasn't worked out exactly what the job will be, and on the spot she suggests she's going to be consulting for affiliate management and client relationships. Barbara, her CFO, is deeply unimpressed with this appointment. She grills Shandy about her qualifications and experience, and it quickly becomes obvious she only got the job because she's Keeley's mate. Barbara points this out in blunt terms, which prompts Keeley to then confront her about her rude treatment of Shandy. Keeley starts to give Barbara a piece of her mind, but is distracted by her collection of snow globes she has out on display. This is the only outward show of anything personal we've seen from her so far. Barbara explains that she gets one for every place the company sends her, so we see she's clearly been to lots of different places and companies over the years. This insight into Barbara's personal world softened Keeley's approach, but she still tells her that she can't be mean to Shandy, and even though she's a friend of Keeley's without qualifications, she's got intelligence and enthusiasm, so Keeley's giving her a chance. The message must have gone in with Barbara, as she tells Keeley a good job title for her would be a client relations coordinator. Trent tries to talk to Roy in the car park at the end of the day and asks him to give him a chance. Roy dismisses his offer out of hand. It's not clear why, but it's obvious there's a reason Roy doesn't want anything to do with Trent Crimm. Then it's the match day between AFC Richmond and Chelsea. The game is Roy's first return to Chelsea after his retirement from playing football, and he receives a warm welcome from Chelsea's fans after he captained the club for the majority of his career. He gives them a reluctant wave, but is clearly uncomfortable with the attention. Zava is watching the game from the stands and is expected to sign for Chelsea soon, according to Higgins' sources. Chelsea get the better of the first half and go into half-time 1-0 up. Richmond have done well to compete against superior opposition, but it sounds like Chelsea deserve their lead. There's more bad news from the executive seats, as Rupert Mannion has turned up and it looks like he's sweet-talking Zava into a move to West Ham. Rebecca tells Keeley the story of how her and Rupert got together to explain how she knows Rupert will get the player. Rebecca was working in a bar and Rupert kept coming into the bar and basically ground her down until she agreed to go out with him. It's the kind of love bombing that's popular in cults and abusive relationships. It's also similar to the way Rupert was behaving with Nate in the last episode. In the dressing room at half time, Jamie's about to share an idea but shuts up as soon as Trent Crimm comes in the room. This is following Roy's instruction not to talk around the former independent journalist. Ted can see this can't carry on and pulls Roy to one side to have a word with him. He tells Roy to sort out his beef with Trent, using a sterner tone than we're used to seeing from Ted. But he shows it's not too personal by also giving Roy a charming explanation of what Hallmark Christmas movies are. Roy calls Trent Crimm into the shower area and reads to him a newspaper clipping from his Premier League debut, where Trent Crimm trashed him, calling him a mediocre talent and a profound disappointment, despite Roy being just 17 years old at the time. Trent apologises and explains he was trying to be edgy and make a name for himself. It's interesting that Roy has literally carried around those words in his wallet for the past 20 years. Despite having had a glittering playing career and won the Champions League with Chelsea, he's clung on to that early criticism and most likely used it as fuel to fire himself up. Having vented his feelings, Roy then tells the team that they can now talk to Trent Crimm, much to their relief. This allows Jamie to share his idea on how to get the better of Chelsea, which involves dribbling more and passing less, which the rest of the team agree to. Higgins' son's karate teacher, who used to date the woman who runs Zava's avocado farm, tells him that Zava is most likely going to go to West Ham. This prompts Rebecca into action, and she goes to try and hijack the deal. On her way to see Zava, she sees Rupert, who's loathsome as ever. He talks up Nate to her, introduces Zava to her, and then uses switching allegiances from AFC Richmond to West Ham as a metaphor for leaving Rebecca for Bex. Despite her best efforts to hide it, it's obvious that Rupert's comments hurt Rebecca, and she's reeling as Rupert walks off with a smug smile. Thankfully, Rebecca channels her anger towards Rupert into something constructive, though, and tracks Zava down to the gents' toilets and tells him in blunt terms that going to West Ham is a coward's choice. She tells him that going to West Ham is a safe move for him because they'll win anyway, with or without him, and if he really wanted to test his greatness, he should go to Richmond. Rather than use charm like Rupert, Rebecca is doing the opposite and challenging him instead. It might seem like a terrible strategy, but he's a feisty character, so this might be the best way for a small club like Richmond to get his attention. On the pitch, Jamie's half-time tactic is working and they score an equaliser that bounces in off Danny Rojas' face. That's enough to draw the game 1-1 and AFC Richmond take an unlikely point away from Stamford Bridge. After the game, Chelsea call a press conference to announce Zava's signing. In a break with football convention, the player is literally signing his contract at the press conference, though he changes his mind before signing and instead tells the press that he will play for Richmond instead, to the shock of everyone apart from Zava. The only person linked to AFC Richmond that isn't delighted by this news is Jamie Tart. Everyone else is thrilled, but he seems put out that he isn't going to be the star player of the team anymore. Back at the training ground, Ted, Trent and Roy get talking about Roy's return to Chelsea. Roy says he felt sad to be back at his old club. It brought back memories of his last season playing there, when he could feel his playing ability fading and he was no longer able to keep up. He decided to leave before everyone else realised he wasn't up to it anymore too, because he'd rather quit than get fired. Roy then reflects that it might have been better to have stayed around for longer and enjoyed the time that he had for as long as he could. It becomes obvious that he's most likely talking about his relationship with Keeley as well as his time with Chelsea. Roy finishes by saying that he didn't stay because it's not who he is, but Ted counters by saying it's not who he is yet, suggesting that there's a chance for him to change. This episode felt like getting into a warm bath. It was so easy to watch, comforting, and enjoyable all the way through. There wasn't a huge amount of high-stakes drama, but this early in the season you wouldn't expect it. Instead, we got to see Trent Crimm come into the club and become an embedded journalist for the season. Roy exercised some demons from his past. Rebecca get the better of Rupert in the transfer market, and Ted assert himself in the dressing room to fix a problem. Nothing earth-shattering, but enjoyable moments with characters I've come to love spending time with. It was just a really lovely episode of Ted Lasso. In the opening episodes, there were hints that things weren't quite Keeley might have hoped for at KJPR. It was more or less confirmed in this episode that she's not properly in charge of her company. Keeley's employees definitely weren't selected by her, because Barbara said that she'd worked with them before. That was pretty obvious anyway, because they all seemed so dull, and Keeley's so vibrant. Now Keeley's brought in Shandy, it'll create an interesting dynamic, as at least there'll be one other person in the company with a bit of personality. I wonder if we'll see Keeley bring those boring office drones out of their shell in this season, and let them express themselves a bit, or if instead we'll see a different story about who's really pulling the strings behind the business. Faye Southall left a comment on my episode 1 video to suggest that it might even be Rupert who's funding the business, which will be an interesting twist. We'll have to see what happens. Roy's speech at the end of the episode, where he talked about leaving Chelsea, was obviously also about his relationship with Keeley. When he said, "I can't keep up anymore, I'm not good enough," those were the kind of things he was saying towards the end of season 2 about Keeley when she was being featured in Vanity Fair and being offered the chance to start a new company. He felt inferior and pushed aside. When you put it through this lens, it makes it pretty tragic when he says he wishes that he'd stayed and just enjoyed himself, but that's not who he is. So surely, if Roy's having these thoughts now, it may well mean that it's not long until he tries to patch things up with Keeley. Trent Crimm points out to Ted the obvious metaphor behind Roy's story about going back to Chelsea, but Ted doesn't seem to pick up on it. I wonder if that's because he's too caught up in replying Roy's story to his own situation. Roy's talking about regret about leaving his team too early instead of staying around longer and just enjoying himself. Ted was speculating about why he was still at Richmond in the last episode, so maybe Roy's words are helping him to convince him to stay in London and compete for the title with AFC Richmond. I really like the way that Ted dealt with the situation between Trent and Roy in this episode. I'm not sure the Ted of Season 2 would have got involved so early and so assertively, and that would have meant the problem would have got out of hand. He saw that the players not talking around Trent was an issue and confronted Roy about it straight away. It's pretty rare to see Ted be assertive, and obviously Roy's not someone to mess with, but this moment showed that Ted can be tough when he needs to be. Last season, Ted was battling a lot of his personal demons and didn't always have a close eye on what was happening on the team, meaning he missed a lot of Nate's moments where he was being mean to players. Here we can see Ted's much more involved and performing at his best as he deals with the situation well and Roy takes on board Ted's feedback and fixes his long-standing feud with Trent Crimm. There have been a few other hints at Ted's taking his job more seriously this season. He was reading Beard's football strategy book in this episode, and he knew what 4-4-2 was in the first episode, so there are signs that he wanted to get better. Going back to Roy and Trent Crimm, I have some sympathy for Trent. I've written blog articles about football games in the past, including giving players ratings out of 10 for their performances in games. One week I gave a player a 5 out of 10 score and was pretty scathing in my write-up. Then the player's mum started following my blog on Twitter, and suddenly I felt really guilty about trashing her son's performance, similar to the way Trent Crimm wrote about Roy Kent's Premier League debut. It's easy to forget that players are people with feelings too. Now I try to be objective in my criticisms about players when I write about football, and if I write anything critical I make it about the specific performance rather than the player themselves. It was nice to see the introduction of the Zava character in this episode. The signing of a new player was suggested in the last episode, so it wasn't a huge surprise to see him commit his future to Richmond. And with Jamie Tartt becoming a much nicer and more relatable character over the course of last season, Zava being a bit of a handful also makes sense as there needs to be a source of conflict in the dressing room to create drama. It'll be fun to see him arrive at Richmond in the next episode, as he's obviously got a lot of talent, but there's a huge ego to come with it too. My favourite line in this episode was Zava's when he was introduced to Rebecca and he said, "It's an honour for you to meet me." I just love the complete arrogance that he showed towards her. I always love the way that the show can use its funniest lines to also help us to understand the characters too. It's a good way to keep the laughs coming, but also to make sure we get to know the characters along the way. Shortly after the episode aired, Apple Music released an official Ted's Breakup Mix playlist, which Ted asked Will and then Beard to go fetch from his apartment. I'll not list the songs, but I'll put a link in the description if you want to check it out. It's actually pretty brilliant, with some excellent breakup music on there. I think it might actually be genuinely useful to listen to if you're trying to get over an amorous disappointment. I find it very interesting that this episode covered Trent Crimm joining the club for the season so he could write a book about them. As in the last episode, Coach Beard was reading a book called The Miracle of Castel di Sangro, which is about a writer who follows a football team for a season and writes a book about his experience. I doubt very much that this was a coincidence. The Zava character is obviously based on the real-life footballer Zlatan Ibrahimovic. Firstly, they're physically very similar. They both have a little beard, strong jawline, and a man bun. They also both have names that begin with a Z. They've both played for Juventus, and probably Ajax too, judging by the footage from the trailer. Higgins also mentions that Zava has gone through 14 teams in 15 years, leaving behind a trail of chaos and trophies. Zlatan's only played for 9 teams in his 21-year playing career, which isn't quite as many, but it's still quite a lot. These are just surface details though, and the real similarities between Zava and Zlatan seem to be attitude and ability. From what we've been shown so far, Zava is a world-class striker with a world-class ego to match it, and that's exactly what Zlatan Ibrahimovic was like as a player. He would regularly fall out with just about everyone at the clubs he played at, but could also pull off remarkable things on the pitch too. So if Zava is going to have those tendencies, it should make him a very fun character to have at AFC Richmond. Ted asked Keeley how her new company is going, and she says she'd like her co-workers to loosen up a bit, and suggests she might hire a shaman to do a load of ayahuasca with them under a blood moon. I'd never heard of this before, but apparently it's a psychedelic brewed drink from South America. Some users talk about experiencing ego death as a result of their experience, and many others find they access a deeper understanding of the universe and their place within it, though there is also frequently a purging stage that users experience, which involves violent vomiting and diarrhea, so I'm not completely sure it's the perfect corporate away day activity. I'd go with Ted's suggestions of an escape room if I was Keeley. Ted says at half-time against Chelsea that the team was so unoffensive that it could be a Hallmark Christmas movie. He later talks to Roy about how these films often involve a woman falling in love with a man who owns a Christmas tree farm, who may also be Father Christmas or a prince. The closest film I could find to Ted's descriptions was You, Me and the Christmas Tree, which sounds absolutely dreadful. Even watching a 30-second trailer nearly sent me to sleep. Beard mentions toward the end of the episode that Jane finds his relationship with Ted threatening. This isn't the first time this has come up, as Keeley mentioned in episode 6 of last season that Jane once followed her all the way home to ask her if Beard was in an intimate relationship with Ted. When Roy Kent is shouting at the team about not speaking to Trent Crimm, Jamie Tartt is giggling in the background. It's not clear if this was scripted, Phil Dunster improvising how he thought Jamie Tartt would react, or whether he was breaking character and it's the actor laughing. My guess would be that it was planned, as Jamie says later in the episode that it's funny when Roy Kent's shouting at someone else. Barbara has about 65 snow globes in her collection. The actress who plays Barbara is called Katie Wicks, and she's 43 years old. So if the character she's playing is a similar age, she can't have worked for an employer for much more than 20 years, meaning she's accumulated at least 3 snow globes a year. So she's averaging about 4 months at each assignment she has. This might not be great news for Keeley and her new company. Why does Barbara stay for such short periods? Could the investor be one of those venture capitalist firms that sell off companies as soon as they can turn a profit? I have a feeling that those snow globes have more relevance to the story than just a cute little insight into Barbara's personality. Chelsea's real-life manager, Graham Potter, recorded a video for their social media previewing the game against Richmond and spoke about Roy Kent's return to Chelsea and his respect for the work Ted Lasso has done at AFC Richmond. Some Chelsea fans were unimpressed by the video and commented that he should be focused on the club's real-life challenges rather than promoting a fictional TV series. We're just 2 episodes into this season and it already feels like there's a lot of story to get our teeth into. Richmond have got their first point of the season with the draw at Chelsea, and the talk of them being likely to finish bottom of the table will surely go away now they've signed a world-class player in Zava. However, it's almost certain that Zava's arrival will ruffle a few feathers. Jamie Tartt has already showed signs of feeling pushed aside, and we may see him slip back to some of his old ways after all the progress we've seen him make recently. The dressing room has been quite harmonious lately, so a bit of chaos and animosity might not be such a bad thing. I think Zava's arrival will shake things up nicely. I think Roy had a bit of a breakthrough internally in this episode, when he was talking about wishing he'd just enjoyed things more rather than ending it prematurely at Chelsea. It's too late for him to relive his playing career, but not too late for his relationship with Keeley. Potentially at least. But will he be able to put his thoughts into action to make himself vulnerable? That's not something he's always been willing to do, so we might not see an immediate change between them. Ted's situation also seemed to change in his mind a little this episode, with him seemingly more dedicated to his coaching job and less distracted by off-the-field issues. It only takes one phone call from Kansas to disrupt this though, and we saw at the end of the last episode that his ex-wife might have a new partner, so there may still be more to come from that. Then there's Rupert and Nate's West Ham team that we didn't get to see much of this week. We find out from Rupert that they beat Leicester in their opening game, so Nate's off to a winning start. I think we're getting all this information about the pattern of abusive behaviour Rupert showed to Rebecca because we're going to see it repeat on Nate, so expect to see things go wrong for him over the course of the season eventually. Thank you for watching my recap and review of episode 2 of season 3 of Ted Lasso. I'll be posting my video for episode 3 shortly after it airs. Please subscribe to make sure you don't miss it. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up. Goodbye.